Hello, Brianna. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics posting here. So we're going to jump right in, share screen. First, I like to take a look at all of the post here to see if you had any issues with putting the images up there and labeling them. Looks like you did okay here. Temperature, contrast, and hardness. Yeah. So yeah, that looks all pretty good. Your exposures look good as well. They look fine. What I mean by exposure is the amount of light that's been collected in rendering the image. The brights need to be a certain level, and the darks need to be a certain level. They don't want to be so bright that they are blown out, but they also don't want to look muddy, sort of like dingy. And opposite for the darks, you want them to be dark and rich, but you still want them to have some kind of texture to them. Otherwise, they just kind of flatten out. So when we're talking about exposure, we're looking at a range. So direction. This is, of the 5, direction is always going to be the most valuable one to be considering. It's really the first one that you think of, especially when you're on location, because you're subject to it. The sun, you can't move the sun. We're moving around the sun ourselves, and so we have to wait until we're in the right position. The Earth has moved to the right position so that the sun is shining from the angle that we want it to be. That's direction. When we're outside and we're considering the time of day that we make the photograph, we're considering the first element, characteristic of lighting, which is direction. So it's very important to always consider, where is the light coming from? Now, we've been doing this in a sort of circle around it linearly. There is some consideration when you start to go above, up, and down, which we'll cover later on. But the circle around like this, we'll call that the compass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. 6, 7, and 8. We're not skipping 7. And then 9 was just basically your choice for fun. I like that you put for fun because I'm hoping all of these are fun. What I really kind of think is interesting about what you're doing here, the one that you chose is you're utilizing the rhythm of shapes, repetition of shape. So here you have bottle or shape that is creating this negative space. Then you have bottle shape that's creating this other negative space, and this bottle shape that's creating the final space. And then you have these shadows. Oops, you have these shadows. Whoops. Didn't mean to click. You have these shadows that are creating an additional bit of character to the photograph. You've also been very careful to make sure that this tone and this tone are being sort of divided by this bottle, kind of hidden. It's very clear that you have paid attention to a lot of different things in this image. Now, there is a little bit here where we might have served us better to have this either cut completely off right here at the bottle. So, missing part of the photograph there, right here. Let's see, closing one eye sometimes helps. When you close one eye and kind of block it off to your own view. I know you just see my hand up in the screen, but that can sometimes help. The reason this is a little bit of a sort of a spot to think about is that it's not vertical. It's a little bit to the angle and a little bit of angle. Diagonals are energy makers, basically. When we're talking about visual language and how it communicates to our reviewers, diagonals will give us the sense of energy, this sort of movement kind of thing that happens. movement isn't the right word. Energy is the right word. You get this sense of energy when you have this, and you're putting a sense of energy right in the top corner here. When you have a shape here that isn't straight up and down. Gosh. So the quickest way to do that would have been to shift your camera right over a little bit like this, or come in just a little bit, or move the bottle over just a little bit there, or move the bottle in more. That would have helped. The camera, maybe tilting the camera so everything would have been straight, would have moved that top of the bottle over this way just a little bit, getting it to be perfectly on the side. The reason I'm pointing this out is because you've created such a graphic image here. You're relying on the graphic sort of repetition of the composition to sort of act as the structure, that any small thing then starts to take on greater influence in the composition. So you have to pay even more attention than you already have been paying attention to. So again, repetition, we're doing very good with repetition here. This is the typical position 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 being up here, right behind. It's like looking into a sunset, and it's always going to create this dramatic, monolithic kind of scenario. I asked everybody to make sure that they're blocking the light, that the light isn't actually showing. And I think you did a pretty standard thing here, where you put the bottle there and you're allowing the shadows to kind of create this radial composition here. There's nothing wrong with it. There are lots of other solutions that you can use there. This is where later on, when you start using the reflectors, that those would help, because using a reflector to bounce a little bit of light into here, here, and here would have really helped on that. Same thing with this one, position number 4 coming from this direction. I'm pleased that you are identifying these perfectly. You are definitely seeing the characteristics of light. You're definitely seeing the different positions and identifying them correctly. You're playing around with the composition. You're allowing things to run off of the page. This first one is particularly challenging because you have no other manipulation tool other than moving the light around and positioning these bottles, which you're introduced to the first time with this initial phase of the project. So it takes time for you to become desensitized in a way to the subject being a bottle, and being able to see it more and more as a shape or a texture, or a tone, things like this, or just an armature for the light. I like to say sometimes. Intensity. Now we're getting into the two sources of light, and let's see here. There's a light. Okay, now we're getting some. I was saying on these first because, boy, we really have that other one really down low. I mean, I can see a bit right here. Yeah, I mean, you can see a bit of light going on here. That's a pretty subtle job. That's a nice bit of work there. And on my monitor, you may not see it on your monitor. I can see the faintest of separations right here. I'm wondering if this is not using a reflector. If perhaps you set this one where you were using the reflector and you use it for intensity, because the reflector is for hardness. I'm sorry, for contrast, where you're bouncing the light that's leaving the light back into the composition. So the key light shines light from a direction. It passes the light that passes by the objects, that's not hitting the objects, we recapture on the other side with a reflective surface and redirect it back into the scene, into areas that we want it to be in. That is manipulating the contrast. In other words, bringing up the shadows so there's more modulation there. We did that second. We went from direction, and then we moved over to contrast. And the reason was so that we could work in the subtlety of that and then move into the secondary light after that. So I'm wondering if that's what it was that you might have done. Let me take a look at what you did for contrast, and we may see it. Let's see. Yeah, I think I just think you mislabeled them. This definitely has two lights in them. This has two light sources. So yeah, you just flip-flopped them is all. And that's an easy fix. No problem. You just go in and you can edit your post. I'm gonna just assume here on this, though, that you went for a soft focus. I think that, well, first of all, it's perfectly fine. Use a soft focus. I have no attachment to like I guess you could say the box when it comes to photography. I really want you to feel the freedom to explore in all kinds of different directions and do the things that you feel are contributing to what's important to you when you're using photography. And focus is one of them. And who says that photography has to be in perfectly sharp tack focus? That said, when you make a decision like that, you want to go all the way with it. You don't want to kind of half step it, because then it looks like maybe it's an error, or maybe you didn't quite mean it to be that way. It just is sort of a little bit. And so this one does well with it because it's far enough into that realm where it becomes deliberate. It feels deliberate. It looks like, yes, this is definitely not supposed to be in focus. This one as well, this one that has that soft sort of liquid feel to it. This one starts to get the other way because we start to see some texture in here that is sort of playing tricks with us a little bit. This one is a bit better, less texture. I'm not as crazy about the composition, or I'm a little more concerned about the composition because of that slight angle again that we talked about, creating a little bit of tension. You've got such a beautiful formal sort of thing going on here that those really want to be straightened. The good news here is with something like this is we can correct that very simply in Photoshop. Although we don't use Photoshop in this course, we're not editing. We are simply studying the characteristics of light, the creativity of light. Editing is another thing that we'll do, but this is so simple to correct. So when I mention some of these things, it's going to be very simple. But the difference between something like this, where it is not quite out of focus enough, and this, where you've got it all the way out of focus, is the difference between you meant to do it and you're wondering if it's okay to do it. And so we want to make sure that you decide, this is what I'm going to do. Present it. That's all I would ever ask from you, is to say, what is your interpretation of this? And if you present it as such, I will accept it as such. In other words, I'm not looking at what I'm not trying to find what I'm looking for. I'm trying to observe what you are looking at. That's my work as a instructor here. So I'm going to go ahead and move to your next piece here. we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but that's okay. All right. Now looking at color temperature. This is temperature, and temperature is we use it in terms of degrees. 55 is what we were using, and the whole point of this section was to explore the variations of options that you have in terms of color temperature with both your light and the options to capture that with your camera. Because you have your light and you have the ability to move that light to from one temperature to another. The lights we use in our studio are called bicolor, 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 2 colors. And so because of that, we can shift from like 3200, I think, is the lowest, to 5600, which I believe is the highest. And so that's a pretty good range, going from a real low warm tone, which is the 3200, to the higher. And so in moving those back and forth, if you set your camera on one thing particular, let's say you set it on to be correctly reading the light when it is at 55K, so the camera is looking for 55K to be correct. You're telling it the light you're seeing is 55K, and then the light you're giving it is actually not that, it's 32. You're going to get a warm light. You're going to get warmth. The opposite will happen if you do tell the camera that the light is 3200 and the light is actually 5500. You'll get a bluish, sort of really cold looking image there. Then you start to combine and switch in between, see all the medium levels in between there. What we're wanting you to do is, first of all, of course, witness these variations and understand the subtlety of them and the not so subtlety of them. Also, understand you have this kind of control with the lighting, and also you have this kind of option in your camera. You need to be able to navigate to those the white balance settings in your camera and choose them when you need to. White balance is an important factor in all of your color photography that you're going to be doing. So we want to be able to identify what light am I in and lock your light down, your camera down to the particular light. This becomes even more important when you have a mixed lighting situation. Like, for instance, it's you're inside somewhere and there's light coming through a window, and then you have artificial lights lighting up the room somewhere, and you have these 2 different types of lights. You have to choose, in a way, decide which of those lights am I going to have be balanced. Which, do I want the overall tone to be warm, or do I want it to be cool? Because if you balance for the inside lights, the cool light the light that's coming through the window will look very cool and almost bluish. And if you do the opposite, the light that's coming from inside, the artificial light inside, will look very warm compared to the very clean color of the daylight that you calibrated your camera to. I hope that all kind of makes sense, but all of that was the point of working through the temperature. And it looks like you have a lot of subtlety here, but I'm not seeing a huge range there. I'm wondering if either one, your camera doesn't have a tremendous range, or number 2, you were selecting images that were all alike. I'm fairly certain that everybody, because I was moving around the room, that everybody was moving the lights and shifting them from color to color. And I can see here that you have a setting here that looks more naturally lit, and then you get very warm over here and things like that. But you would have seen even more of a variation there. And I hope you did see more of a variation, because that was the point of the experiment. And then we have the last of them, and this is where we're working with hardness. And hardness has to do with this stuff down here. these areas here. And it means, are they crisp and sharp, or are they feathered out and soft? That's what we mean by hardness. Are they not hard, or are they very, very hard? So we do that in this exercise with diffusers. We put some kind of object in between the light and the subject, and it then scatters the light such that it will diffuse some of the line work on the shadows. It will diffuse the edges of those things. And so you are getting that here and here. It's not a huge amount of diffusion that's going on here, but I can tell that there is some diffusion. So this is a very light bit of diffusion, a very minor bit of diffusion that's happening here on this image. I skipped over to this image because this image clearly has, like, stuff in here that doesn't seem to want to belong. Like this light right here is in it just is, it's too intense to have in the middle there. Not only is it very intense, not only is it a point of the highest contrast that you have, darkest to lightest, but it's also very close to the center of your photograph. It's sort of like, look here and nowhere else. That can be very valuable when you need it to be. Very valuable when you need it to be, but be aware that that is exactly what you're doing. You're telling us, don't look anywhere else but here. That's one of the things that you have to understand when you're using high contrast light like that. Here you can see, yeah, where you're, and I can actually see you got the car just a little bit close right there. And that's okay. Again, that's a small little Photoshop tweak that we can do, but it's a cool example of what you can do with a slight adjustment. And then here we have, looks like some mixed lighting going on here, where you have a very warm light going on back here, and there's some other kind of light that's hitting over here. Very interesting. It got quite warm on this. So this is the kind of dramatic shift that you can expect if you have your camera set to something like the daylight balance, or even cooler than that, like the clouds icon that you have on your camera. That's even a higher color temperature. And then you have your lighting set at the lowest, like 32 or something, where it's really, it'll look like this, very almost amber in color. I'm very, encouraged by the quality of your compositions. It looks like you're handling the camera fairly well. I'm very interested in what you're doing here with these, because it is exploring some things that are a little bit less something that we don't expect, a little less expected here. So I'm always I'm happy to see when you guys are sort of experimenting with something that is maybe not as ordinary as you might have preconceived. So yeah, that one works really well. And then the rest of your compositions here, you're utilizing the entire space. You're and not all of them are utilizing the entire space. We do want to make sure that when we make our images, that we're considering the entire space. And it seems like in there are some that you're very particular about, and then others where it wasn't as particular. And it's almost like a break of concentration sometimes when you're doing it, and that's not a flaw. That's just, you have to stop and kind of relax a bit, because shooting and making photographs and being in that sort of mode is it takes energy. It takes a great effort to really put yourself into that mode, and it can be it can be exhausting. You can get tired, and so you need to know when to stop, because then you can kind of regroup and kind of relax and close your eyes and kind of breathe a little bit, take a short break, and then come back right into it again when you've had a little bit of a rest and shoot again. Because even though it doesn't seem like, we're doing a lot of physical work there, it is actually physically draining to do this kind of work, especially if you are, really deep into the process. You do consume quite a bit of energy when you're doing it. All right. Well, so I think your interpretation of all of these is working quite well. And you seem to be handling the camera fairly well. Keep exploring, keep working with things that that seem a little bit maybe unexpected. Experiment with them. I'd much rather have you like fail spectacularly than kind of like wander a little bit in mediocrity. Failing spectacularly means you took a huge leap and tried to do something that was adventurous. Mediocrity might be like, well, I'm just going to kind of take it easy and walk the straight path here. And there's nothing wrong with doing that sometimes, because sometimes you just have to get from point A to point B. But this isn't the sometimes. This is a free, open, safe place for you to experiment all kinds of different things. And I want you to feel comfortable doing those kinds of things. The grade stuff is all set up so that you can do that. Like I said, I will don't want to put you in a situation where you're penalized for experimenting, nor do I want to interrupt success when you're really doing well. This is all about giving you the room and the space to understand the concepts and to explore how they fit into what it is that you're trying to learn, because it is most important to understand that this is your learning, not about my teaching. This is about your learning. And so ask questions anytime. I'll be happy to go over any of the images with you if you had any specific questions that I didn't talk about. And I look forward to seeing you in the studio. All right. Bye now.